So we must do two things, two great things together to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself. And so he began to look at those two other orders and could see that they have a different purpose entirely. Also, parallel with the synonym study, he had been drawn to the four sides of the Holy City in Mrs. Eddy's 16th chapter, and consequently to the capitalized terms of Word, Christ, Christianity, and science. He could already see that the 7 and the 4, now the 7 synonymous terms for God, and these 4 of the 4 sides of the Holy City, he already could see these must be two different categories. Two different categories. But he felt intuitively that they could be related. And we know now that when they are related, a system is formed. So that when the fourfold operational nature is interrelated with the category of the 7 synonymous terms for God, it will be the 4, actually, that determine the order of the 7. We're just talking about this now. It isn't something that was completely clear to John Dorley at that point, but you can see that the 4 were starting to come in to work on him, and yet the 7 were there, and so he began to get the first inkling that the 7 and the 4, which were all capitalized terms, must be two great categories. And so the 4 determine the 7. The 4 determine what? That brings us really to about the end of the 1930s, right about 1938, 39. Already in 1938, John Dorley was again working in the Genesis chapter, and he was had been drawn very much to that statement at the close of the first record of creation. You know that statement. It's as follows: the numerals of infinity, called 7 days, can never be reckoned according to the calendar of time. These days will appear as mortality disappears, and they will reveal eternity, newness of life, in which all error forever disappears, and thought accepts the divine infinite calculus. Actually, the link between the days and the synonymous terms had already been seen, and the link between the days of creation and the numerals of infinity had already been seen. Apparently, when that synonym study was done, it became very clear that within the whole body of information of ideas that belong to each synonymous term, say for instance to mind, that you had certain ideas that had a more relative sense to them, and certain ideas that had a more absolute sense to them. So that some ideas had lent themselves to a time-wise situation, or a days, we say a days sense, not D-A-Z-E, but D-A-Y-S, days of creation versus numerals of infinity. We could perhaps look that up. Who can find that for me in the study aid? Days of creation and the numerals of infinity. Page 30. So you see that they began to actually scale the ideas now of the 7 synonymous terms in such a way as to order them into a scale or an order of ideas that lend themselves to a time sense, a developing sense, and so forth, and those ideas that have more of a timeless value to them, that express timelessness. So you see, just quickly we can look at that scale of the days of creation on page 30. And you see that creator, beginning, wisdom, guiding, leading, steering, all have a time-wise sense to them, as though there is a development going on. If you have a beginning, you're going to go somewhere and arrive somewhere, huh? So to speak. Whereas you see that under the numerals of infinity, you have the ideas of all, idea, intelligence, power, and law. You have no time. There's no time sense in them, no human connotation to them. We wouldn't give a human connotation to those terms, or to the terms substance, order, the only good, reality, understanding. Whereas looking at the days of creation standpoint, the point of spirit, you see it has to do with separating rightly, right? Choosing rightly, separating rightly, development, something is unfolding, you see. You hear a time-wise sense in it, something is evolving. There's a purity and a birth process that both express the days of creation. So that's just to indicate to you that when they did that synonym study, they were able to see that in all of those ideas, there actually were these 2 classifications of a days of creation sense and a numerals of infinity. And so Mrs. Eddy had said there, the numerals of infinity called 7 days, so to say, that which you think are 7 days, what you think is a development, what you think is a time-wise situation, is a timeless issue, is timelessly characterized through the numerals of infinity. And she said that could not be reckoned according to the calendar of time. That those days would disappear as mortality disappears. Would appear as mortality disappears. And they will reveal eternity, newness of life, in which all error forever disappears, and thought accepts the divine infinite calculus. So it was at this time that John Dorley was asking himself, what is the divine infinite calculus? He knew that a calculus was a process of reasoning by the use of symbols. For instance, if you think about arithmetic, you know that its numerals are operating in a calculus of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Or if you think of music, you have the notes that operate through tone, rhythm, melody, and harmony. So his thought was turning around all of these things, and at the same time he had been looking into, as I think I said, Mrs. Eddy's 16th chapter, going over that city foursquare, looking at everything she had to say about the four sides of the holy city. And he knew that she gave the answer there really from two standpoints, two aspects of the four sides and four cardinal points. That she gave the four sides as Word, Christ, Christianity, and divine science, and the four cardinal points as Word, Christ, Christianity, and Christian Science. And while he was considering all of these things, it suddenly fell into place for him that this indeed was the calculus, that the four were the calculus. So that when she spoke of thought accepting the divine infinite calculus, she showed the relationship between the seven and the four. She showed that the seven would lead to the four. Just as we've said, it does for each one of us. And you see that she says that that these days will appear as mortality disappears, and that they will reveal eternity, newness of life, in which thought accepts the divine infinite calculus. It's a beautiful thing that shows us that relationship between the seven and the four. Well, I told you that we were going to return again to the four Bible teachings, and this is the moment, because it was then in 1941 that John Dorley saw the correlation between the days of creation, the commandments, the Beatitudes, and the Lord's Prayer as being the four, as having the tonality of the four. The word order, each one of those four in the word order, but having the tonality of the four. You can begin to feel now that the four is going to come in more and more and more. He was at that time mentioning over and over again the three orders. The three orders. He had not yet seen the fourth order, and did not want to force that issue. But in 1941, he saw the correlation really between the word order and the science order, namely that if one took the standpoint of the word order subjectively from principle, that this would structure itself, this consciousness would structure itself differently from the word order. To take the central point of the word order and to look out subjectively from that principle would bring forth a new structure an order that was a structure. And at the same time, he had been thinking about, actually there are two versions of this story, I believe. Peggy Brooks says that it was shortly after that he found again in Exodus the candlestick, Moses' candlestick. But there is another version of the story that says that all of this was going on at the same time, and that as he began to think about the word order subjectively, also to his attention came again the seven-branched candlestick of Moses, and he saw that this was indeed the science order, the exact order of science. And so he set forth the science order for the first time in 1941 as the word order seen subjectively. What does that look like? Actually, I have deprived you of a lot here. So perhaps I didn't make that clear, that when John Dorley was considering two further orders from the order of the Word under the criticism of the Mother Church, that those other two orders were the ones that appear in the textbook, namely on page 115 of the Christian Science textbook, the Christ order, which is principle, life, truth, love, soul, spirit, mind, and then the order that appears in the glossary in answer to the to defining God in the glossary, the Christianity order, which he could see because he was feeling out and sensing out, oh my gosh, it's so big, isn't it? Because having done the synonym study, you see, that's what was the key to everything, what opened everything up, unlocked everything. It didn't only decode the word, but it would then give you all the information you need to be able to decipher what those other two orders were in the textbook, what that order is on page 115. And the order in the glossary of principle, mind, soul, spirit, life, truth, love, the Christianity order. And so he, earlier on then, before finding the science order, was becoming clearer and clearer about those three orders and wondering, where is that fourth order? Where is the fourth? Because he could see the seven correlating, first the seven correlating with the Word, in the Word order, and the seven correlating with the Christ order, the seven correlating with Christianity, the Christianity order. There was no science order anywhere. But the pattern was given on the Mount. I wanted to read to you what Mrs. Eddy says about that a mother is the strongest educator. She, trains the child according to the pattern given upon the Mount. And that pattern given on the Mount, included in that pattern, is the seven-branched candlestick. And the wonder of that science order is something that we will look into in the next hour. Okay. All right, I just want to make something crystal clear. The fourth order was set forth for the first time in 1941. I think we said that. in 1942, for the first time, the four orders were identified as expressing the divine processes of operation of Word, Christ, Christianity, and science. That's quite different, isn't it? I mean, we take so much for granted. We think that all went together. To see a fourth order, but not to identify it yet. You see, that the orders were not completely identified yet with the four processes of operation of Word, Christ, Christianity, and science. Okay? Yeah. So the 7 and the 4 were linked together for the first time in 1942.